start. So it's my pleasure to introduce our last speaker this semester. And our speaker is Christos Kyriacou from the University of Cyprus, from the Department of Philosophy and Classics. And Christos is visiting us as an Erasmus visitor, and his talk today will be on defending the moral-epistemic parity.
Yeah. So this is a paper we co-authored with Terence Cuneo, and basically defends what he calls the moral-epistemic parity, which is basically the idea that there are normally structural similarities between the moral domain and the epistemic domain, like categorical reasons, motivation, objectivity and truth, and so on. And these structural analogies between the two domains suggest that we should be realists or anti-realists for both domains. So moral and epistemic stand, moral or epistemic realism stand or fall together. They are somehow apart. Okay. So in his 2007 book, The Normative Web, Terence Cuneo defended at length the idea that the moral and the epistemic are on par, and he suggested that actually this supplies us with an argument for moral realism. The argument is quite simple. He called it the core argument. It basically says that if there are epistemic facts, then there are moral facts. Of course, there are epistemic facts. Therefore, there are moral facts, and moral realism is true. His way of putting it is as follows: core argument in terms of the modus tollens. Premise 1: if moral facts do not irreducibly exist, then epistemic facts do not irreducibly exist. Well, of course, epistemic facts irreducibly exist. Therefore, also moral facts irreducibly exist, and then it follows that moral realism is true by definition. Okay. So, premise 1 is basically what we might call the parity premise, in the sense that it suggests that insofar as there are moral facts, there are epistemic facts, and vice versa. Now, Chris Heathwood wrote a critical appraisal of the core argument, and he basically criticizes the parity premise, which is premise 1. Heathwood claims, as we shall see, he claims a lot of moral facts do irreducibly exist. Epistemic facts actually are reducible. They are reducible to descriptive facts, where with descriptive facts I mean facts are somehow representable by experience and descriptive. Okay? So, Heathwood's claim is basically that epistemic facts are descriptive, while moral facts are not, and therefore there is a fundamental disparity between the moral and the epistemic. I mean, the disparity is that moral facts are irreducible, while epistemic facts are reducible, and therefore we cannot appeal to the alleged parity between the moral and the epistemic in order to supply an argument for moral realism. Okay? So basically, he wants to suggest that this undermines premise 1. Actually, Heathwood was a bit incautious here because strictly logically, this is consistent with premise 1. But we should be charitable and understand the moral epistemic parity in more literal terms and understand the parity between moral facts and epistemic facts in terms of biconditional. So there are moral facts if and only if there are epistemic facts, irreducible epistemic facts. So given that there are irreducible epistemic facts, there are also irreducible moral facts. But Heathwood objects that, as we shall see, epistemic facts are actually descriptive. They are reducible, while moral facts are irreducible to descriptive facts. And therefore, the two domains should kept apart. There is this fundamental disparity. If that's the case, then we cannot appeal to they are measured parity between the two domains in order to apply an argument for moral realism. Heathwood is also a realist, like Cuneo. He just thinks that epistemic facts are reducible facts. They are not irreducible epistemic facts. And therefore, we cannot just appeal to epistemic facts as irreducible in order to supply an argument for moral realism by using this parity between the moral and epistemic. Okay, Heathwood offers an argument for his disparity claim, and his argument appeals to and employs Moore's open question argument, a classic Moorean open question argument from Moore's Kyriacou. So as you might know, Moore famously argued that the good is irreducible, is indefinable, is somehow a sui generis property, and he supported this assertion with the open question argument. The open question argument is a kind of semantic test in order to test property identities and conceptual reductions, and it works like this. I mean, Moore thought that any competent speaker will just realize that conceptual reductions are closed questions. So in the case that you are asking, is a bachelor an unmarried man? Obviously, for a competent speaker of English, that's a closed question. Of course, bachelor is an unmarried man. And in the case of goodness, whenever you ask whether is natural property and good, it just remains an open question. So you might say, is pleasure good, or is desiring something good? It just always remains an open question. And Moore generalized that the property of goodness is just a reducible to a descriptive property. So Heathwood is basically using Moore's open question argument, at least a version of it, in order to support the same conclusion with Moore. Basically, the moral facts or moral concepts or properties are just reducible to descriptive or natural properties. So he takes as an example the analysis of good, which is very simplistic actually. This is something we desire. It's an analysis of good, but he says, of course, we can question whether something is good and something we desire is also good. It just remains an open question. This suggests that something we desire cannot reduce goodness. And from that, he concluded that something we desire does not reduce good. Of course, he generalizes from this case, like Moore, to say that moral properties are irreducible. There is no analysis of the moral in terms of the descriptive. No analysis would be plausible. You can just supplement a different naturalistic or descriptive analysis, and the result will be the same. I mean, you could say, I don't know, what's normal, or what's natural, or what we desire to desire, or what's pleasurable, which are really open, according to the input. And this shows that moral facts and properties are somehow reducible to a descriptive. But the important thing now is that when we apply an epistemic, when we apply the open question argument to the epistemic domain, and in particular to epistemic rationality, the result seems very different. It seems that we can close the question. And this seems to suggest that we can have an analysis of epistemic rationality, a conceptual analysis, which is somehow reductive. And therefore, that's why there is a disparity between the moral and the epistemic, at least the epistemic concept of rationality, epistemic rationality. And here, this is the analysis he suggests. So he says, this is likely given my evidence. Is the analysis the correct analysis of reasonable for me to believe epistemic reasonability or rationality? And you can see this if you just apply the open question argument. I mean, it seems that there is an error of coherence to say that this is likely given my evidence, but it's not reasonable for me to believe. And therefore, it's somehow analogous to the case where we ask John is a bachelor, but is he an unmarried man? This is somehow stupid question because it just seems that if he's a bachelor, he's an unmarried man. It's somehow the same. If you say that this is likely given my evidence, then it just follows that it's reasonable for me to believe he thinks. And that suggests that reasonable for me to believe can be conceptually analyzed and reduced to this is likely given my evidence. In that sense, to likelihood on the basis of evidence or probability on the basis of evidence. Okay, so he suggests that epistemic reasonability or rationality is reducible to likelihood on the basis of evidence or probability on the basis of evidence. And that contrasts with the case of morality, where moral facts, as the application of the open question argument to the moral case, seems to show that moral facts are reducible. Epistemic facts, these facts about epistemic rationality, are actually reducible. And that's why he thinks that there is this disparity between the two. Moral facts need to be reducible, but epistemic facts, or these facts about epistemic rationality, are actually reducible. To illustrate his point, he gives the following example. He says, suppose I'm having a visual experience, there's a table in front of me. Suppose this in fact makes it very likely that there is a table in front of me. Now I say, yes, I see that it's quite likely to be true that there is a table in front of me. But still, I don't think it's reasonable for me to believe that there is a table in front of me. He continues by saying that this is a puzzling thing to hear. It seems to be grounds for thinking that I don't really understand what I'm saying. This is not at all how it is in the moral case. This suggests that it might be true that all that reasonable belief amounts to is likely truth given evidence. It means that analytic descriptivism is true of epistemic probability. So while in the case of morality or moral facts or properties, this just seems reducible, and this is indicated by the application of the open question argument. The case of epistemic rationality seems distinctively different. At least that's Heathwood's point. Because it seems incoherent to say that this is likely given my evidence, it's likely given my conceptual evidence that there's a table in front of me, but it's not reasonable for me to believe that there is an error of incoherence in that, in the same way that we say, I'm a bachelor, but I'm not unmarried, I'm not an unmarried man. And therefore, it suggests that we can close the epistemic open question argument as that applies to epistemic rationality if we apply the analysis likely given my evidence. At least this is Heathwood's position. And this basically cements his understanding of this disparity between irreducible moral facts and irreducible epistemic facts, at least facts about epistemic rationality. And therefore, Cuneo's parity premise that suggested that we can appeal to epistemic facts and say there are irreducible epistemic facts. Irreducible epistemic facts have similarities, structural normative similarities with irreducible moral facts, and of course, epistemic facts exist. Therefore, moral facts must exist, therefore, moral realism must be true. Heathwood thinks that we cannot appeal to the reducibility of epistemic facts and to the structural normative analogues between the moral and the epistemic in order to supply an argument for moral realism. It's not that he's not a realist himself, I mean, he's an anti-reductionist moral realist as well, but he just thinks that we cannot appeal to the irreducibility of epistemic facts in order to supply an argument for the irreducibility of moral facts and support realism. So he basically is a little bit going about one argument in favor of moral realism. Now, okay. Now, here starts my response, our response. So, we start with an observation about conceptual analysis and what we call conceptual distance. So, the thought is that when we're trying to provide conceptual analysis, conceptual reductions of properties or concepts, what we're trying to achieve is not just to apply an analysis, a reductive analysis. We're trying to provide an illuminating, non-trivial, non-vacuous analysis. Typically, we try to explain that, to capture that via the requirement of non-circularity. We say we want to provide an analysis that is illuminating, and in order to be illuminating and non-trivial, it should be non-circular. I mean, the analysandum must not reappear in the analysans, or at least puzzling concepts that we're trying to analyze should not reappear in the analysis, because then the problem of analysis will just re-emerge. So we're trying to keep some conceptual distance between the analysandum and the analysans. Okay? And the one classic way to capture that is via means of non-circularity. So an informal conceptual analysis should be non-circular, ideally. If it's circular, maybe because we're analyzing a normative concept, and normative concepts reappear in the analysis, then at least the analysis should be somehow non-trivial, illuminating, and so on. And I'm mentioning this because in Heathwood's analysis, which is basically epistemic rational belief is likely belief given evidence for me, available evidence for me, the worry is that a normative concept, the normative concept of epistemic rationality is analyzed in terms of other normative concepts like probability and evidence. And if that's the case, it's unclear whether the analysis is so interesting or very illuminating. Okay. So this notion of conceptual distance and the successful conceptual reduction must somehow capture can be understood in terms of a tripartite scale of conceptual distance, let's say. So we might talk about conceptual analysis that approximate. With proximate, I mean analyses that are narrowly circular and they are not very illuminating. They seem almost, if not trivial, they just seem narrowly circular. They analyze a normative concept and other normative concepts, and although this might be a conceptual analysis, it might not be very illuminating. For example, if we analyze it is reasonable for you to believe P as you ought to believe P given your evidence, this analysis that is narrowly circular. It's not trivial or entirely vacuous, but given that normative concepts like ought and evidence they appear, it just seems that the analysis is not sufficiently distant. The analysis is not sufficiently distant from the ensemble in order to give an illuminating analysis of what you're trying to clarify. Okay? A less proximate analysis would be it is reasonable for me to believe P. P is most likely given the relevant evidence, and that's the analysis Heathwood suggests. And now this analysis, which is less proximate, it remains uncertain whether it's not again circular, because it remains uncertain whether likelihood or the notion of probability as relates to epistemic rationality and the notion of relevant evidence are not themselves normative. As we shall see, Heathwood tries to analyze likelihood and relevant evidence in descriptive terms, and so he would like to claim that the analysis is actually quite illuminating, is not circular, is not an analysis from normative terms to other normative terms. But this is actually contentious, and I will try to dispute that. I will try to dispute the claim that probability and evidence can be understood in purely descriptive terms. And if that's the case, it remains unclear whether the analysis is very illuminating. The distant analysis is an analysis that analyzes the normative concept of rationality in terms of coherence, as a classic theory of rationality. And although this is a distant theory that, if true, would be illuminating, many people are not coherentists anymore. I mean, there are a minority, perhaps, who is more than coherentists. So although this analysis is clearly non-circular, it's an analysis that obviously will face serious problems, and many people will say it will just fail. Okay? So the point that we're trying to make is that in order to have an analysis of a normative concept that is not just vacuously or trivially circular, it must not be just proximate. If it's distant, then that's the idea, but distant analysis just seems to fail, as the open question argument seems to show. Well, less proximate analysis seem to indicate that it's uncertain whether they analyze the normative concept to other non-normative concepts, because these seem to be prima facie normative. So the point I'm trying to make is that perhaps Heathwood's analysis is not so illuminating because it just analyzes the normative concepts to other normative concepts, which seem non-analyzable in descriptive terms. They seem reducible in themselves. If that's the case, Heathwood's analysis, which is this, might be a conceptual truth, it would fail to support the epistemic reduction, the idea that we can reduce epistemic facts to descriptive facts, where descriptive facts are facts that we can just represent through our conceptual experience. And if that's the case, that does not undermine the thought that there are reducible epistemic facts. Okay? The same tripartite scale of conceptual analysis we can replicate it in the moral domain. And this is important because it shows that there is a parallel between conceptual analysis in the epistemic domain and the moral domain. So we could, for example, suggest that approximate analysis of X is morally good, is X merits being prized, and as approximate circular analysis, because it analyzes the normative concept of goodness and another normative concept of merit, because to say X merits being prized is basically to say X ought to be prized, which is another problematic normative concept. Okay? A less proximate analysis would be X is morally good, which means, or is synonymous with X would be prized by an ideal agent in idealist competitions. And I say less proximate because it remains unclear whether this analysis is itself normative in some sense or can be given descriptive analysis itself. And this analysis would be X is morally good, which means X would be prized by you and me, or X would be prized by the society I belong. Or of course, although this is a distant analysis that if successful would give us an illuminating analysis, it's an analysis that obviously varies. I mean, no one thinks that the standard of right or wrong is just for this price by you and me. Okay? So, the inferring conclusion is basically that there is no interesting asymmetry between the moral and the epistemic domain. As we can give analysis of moral concepts that seem reducible to other normative concepts, or at least concepts that seem, at least it seems at least uncertain whether they are normative, the same we can do with epistemic concepts like the concept of epistemic rationality. As if we try to provide an analysis of epistemic rationality that seems to involve prima facie other normative concepts, we can replicate the same in the moral domain. So it seems that there is a clear parallel between the epistemic and the moral. Now, the more interesting thing is whether the analysis that Heathwood provides is indeed descriptive. Because as we said, when we said it's a less proximate analysis, it remains unclear whether the notions of probability and evidence involved in the analysis are actually normative or irreducible or normative, non-normative and descriptive. Now, if Heathwood, of course, anticipates the problem with the notion of probability because it seems, as it relates to epistemic rationality, a clearly normative notion. He seems to anticipate the objection, and he actually argues that probability as it relates to epistemic rationality is actually a notion that can be given in descriptive analysis, and the notion of evidence as well. They can be given descriptive analysis. If that's the case, then Heathwood actually provides a distant analysis because it takes a normative concept of epistemic rationality. He he analyzes it in terms of likelihood given evidence, and likelihood and evidence are given descriptive analysis themselves. So the analysis can count as a distant analysis that seems actually intuitive because it does have an air of coherence to say, well, this is likely given by evidence that I see a table in front of me, but it's not reasonable for me to believe. And that would vindicate Heathwood's understanding of this disparity between the moral, where the facts seem irreducible, and the epistemic, where the facts, according to his account, are actually irreducible. Well, now, Heathwood provides the following argument in order to support the idea that the notion of probability as it relates to epistemic rationality is actually analyzable in descriptive terms. So he thinks that if probability were normative and irreducible means, then it would be indexed to the attitudes of agents. But of course, that's not what is the case. And he tries to show that by employing an epistemic variant of Plato's famous Heathwood problem. So he says, suppose we look out the window and see that the streets are wet. We conclude that it probably rained. But now he says, which seems right? That it's true that it probably rained in virtue of the fact that it is reasonable to believe that it rained, or that it is reasonable to believe that it rained in virtue of the fact that it probably rained. Surely the latter is correct. So if we think that probability is something that does not depend on us. The same with reasonable belief. I mean, there are facts out there that are descriptive. These make certain assertions and claims probable, and these assertions that are probable are reasonable for us to believe. It's not the other way around. It is not the other way around that I suppose that because if it is a case that it's true that it probably rained in virtue of the fact that it is reasonable to believe that it rained, it would somehow depend on what we think is reasonable to believe. While it's the other way around. What is reasonable for us to believe is somehow constrained by the facts out there. The descriptive facts that make certain facts probable, and these probable facts make certain beliefs reasonable. Facts are reasonable. Okay? So he thinks it's a descriptive analysis of probability, and it's a descriptive analysis of probability because we start from what we represent as descriptive facts out there. This descriptive, like that, the streets are wet. This seems to make it likely that it has rained, and this makes it reasonable for us to believe that it has rained, given evidence that the wet streets. Okay. Now, we want to criticize Heathwood's descriptivist analysis of probability as it relates to epistemic rationality, and we try to do that by subjecting Heathwood's proposal to anti-dilemma. On the one hand, we suggest that if we understand Heathwood's notion of probability in terms of what we call objective intrinsic account of probability, then it just seems a very plausible theory of rational belief for reasons that I will explain in a minute. Because this notion of probability seems to have nothing to do with what is rational for us to believe in certain circumstances. The second account of probability that we may apply for Heathwood is conditional epistemic probability. Now, this is a more promising account of probability given its purposes. But now the problem with this account is that it seems to reintroduce normative concepts. This notion seems to resist, this notion of probability seems to resist a merely descriptive analysis. And if that's the case, then the word is about providing a normative analysis of the normative term and having this kind of circularity that I spoke previously just emerge. Okay. Let us take first the notion of objective intrinsic probability. So, if we try to understand Heathwood's account of probability in terms of what we call objective intrinsic probability, we can easily offer counterexamples through simple thought experiments with biased coins. basically, this biased coin flip experiment show that this notion is incapable of being that kind of probability that Heathwood's theory of epistemic rationality needs in order to be plausible. And the basic point that this whole experiment made explicitly is that objective intrinsic probability is probability that somehow exists out there in the very fabric of nature of things. It doesn't depend on us or on our evidence. And therefore, given that it does not depend on our evidence, it cannot really supply us with the theory of epistemic rationality, because we think that what is rational for us to believe is constrained by the evidence we have in our disposal. Okay, so let us go through the two biased coin flip experiments that seem to make the point intuitive. So suppose that a coin has either heads on both sides or it has tails on both sides. But you don't know which, so you don't have evidence either way, but you just have evidence that the coin is not fair, it's either heads or tails on both sides, okay? Now, suppose for argument's sake that the coin has tails on both sides. And you don't know that, you just know that it's either both heads or both tails. It follows that no matter what evidence you have, the objective intrinsic probability of the coin coming up tails is 1. It's 1 or very close to 1 because both sides are just tails. Okay? But now, according to the evidence you have at your disposal, it's not reasonable for you to believe this. It's not reasonable to believe that the coin will come up tails. The probability of the coin coming up tails is 1. Because you have no evidence for this claim. The evidence you have suggests that the probability of coming up either tails or heads, given that both sides are either heads or tails, is just 50%. Okay? So what is rational for you to believe is different from what is objectively intrinsically probable. What is objectively intrinsically probable is 1. Probability is 1, and you don't know that because you have no evidence that both sides are tails. But the evidence that you have suggests that the probability of coming tails is 50% because the evidence you have suggests that it's either tails, both sides, or heads. Okay? This shows that a belief being objectively probable is not sufficient for it to be reasonable. Okay? Now, we may have a reverse kind of experiment that shows that a belief being objectively probable is not a necessary condition for it to be reasonable, and this will show that the notion of objective intrinsic probability is basically irrelevant to what is rational for us to believe given evidence. Let us see the second version of the experiment. Imagine that you have strong evidence that the coin is biased towards turning up tails. Perhaps a trustworthy person told you, a reliable person told you, and you believe him, of course. And you should believe him because he's trustworthy. Although unbeknownst to you, the coin is fair. So the evidence now tells you that the coin is not fair, but unbeknownst to you, the coin is actually fair. Bad luck. In this case, the objective intrinsic probability of the fair coin turning up tails is 50%. But the reasonable thing to believe, given your evidence, is that the coin is likely to turn up tails upon flipping because it's not a fair coin. At least this is what we're told. This shows that the belief being objectively probable is not a necessary condition for it to be reasonable. Okay, this biased coin flip experiment just shows that what is reasonable to believe seems independent from objective intrinsic probability. Objective intrinsic probability is neither necessary nor sufficient for rational belief. And the point is that rational belief is constrained by the evidence we possess or we should possess to be more accurate. While objective intrinsic probability might have nothing to do with the evidence we have in our disposal or should we have in our disposal. Okay. So we will try to understand the notion of probability of Heathwood in terms of objective intrinsic probability that just seems hopeless. Now, the second analysis of the notion of probability for Heathwood's account seems more promising. It's the notion of conditional epistemic probability. the notion of conditional epistemic probability is the idea that you form a certain probability about the belief given some other belief, okay, or some other evidence. Now, this is more plausible because it takes into account the notion of evidential constraint. I mean, rational belief is constrained by the evidence we should have in our possession. Okay. And this is suggested actually by Heathwood's own account, where he says that rational belief for me is likely belief given evidence. So it's a belief that based on some other belief, its likelihood is somehow raised. Now the problem with this analysis that we're trying to indicate of probability is that when you try to analyze or understand better what's going on with conditional epistemic probability, the normative dimensions of this notion would be quite obvious. So, given that we can't offer a purely descriptive analysis of this notion of conditional epistemic probability, the worry that we're analyzing normative concept to other normative concepts, because it will remain that probability understood as conditional epistemic probability, it's just another normative notion. You have this worry of normative analysis to another normative analysis and not a purely descriptive analysis. And that would indicate that it might be the case that facts about epistemic rationality are reducible to facts about probability and evidence, but facts about probability and evidence are not themselves reducible to descriptive facts. They remain irreducible. Okay? Which would mean, I think, that it might be conceptual truth that, or an epistemic fixed point, if you like, rational belief is likely belief given evidence, but that would not indicate the idea that epistemic facts are descriptive, because the analysis will not be amenable to a descriptivist understanding despite Heathwood's claims. Anyway. So, suppose I will go on to understand conditional epistemic probability via Arrhenian or Candelian terms and suggest that this understanding of conditional epistemic probability is clearly normative, and then very quickly I will understand conditional epistemic probability according to the Bayesian framework, and then again I will suggest that it remains again normative, a normative analysis of conditional epistemic probability, which will suggest that probability as relates to epistemic rationality is a normative notion that resists descriptive analysis. Okay? So, according to a broad meridian understanding, this is basically Planck's understanding, which is meridian. According to a broad meridian view, conditional epistemic probability is determined, or the proposition is determined by that degree of credence that an agent with properly functioning cognitive faculties would have. So if your cognitive faculties work as they should work, then they will be able to give you the right credence for the conditional epistemic probability of the proposition. Now that analysis, it just seems itself normative because it employs normative concepts. It basically says that cognitive faculty functions properly functioning cognitive faculties when it functions as it ought to, when it functions correctly, if you like, which is another normative concept. So basically, this analysis of conditional epistemic probability is again inherently normative in a way that does not seem to be amenable to descriptive analysis. It just says that the credence of an agent with properly functioning cognitive faculties, where properly functioning cognitive faculties are faculties that work as they ought to, determine or give us the conditional epistemic probability of proposition. So it's again a normative analysis of conditional epistemic probability. How about the Bayesian framework? So according to the Bayesian understanding of conditional epistemic probability, the probability of a belief given private hypothesis is determined by Bayes' rule, Bayes' theorem. And now Bayes' theorem says that we have to settle for a certain probability value for the prior hypothesis on the basis of which we rely in order to come to have a conditional epistemic probability of a proposition. But now the critical question is how we decide the prior probability of the hypothesis on its basis, on which basis we place the belief. Now, that seems a clearly normative question. The prior probability of the hypothesis that on its basis we decide the conditional epistemic probability of the proposition seems a normative question because we should decide the prior probability in terms of relevant evidence. The relevant evidence we have for that hypothesis and its prior probability. And that relevant evidence ideally should be decided by the evidence we ought to have or ought to take into consideration. Again, it seems that this intruding positive concept of what just seems very inserted in the analysis. So again, we need to appeal to Bayesianism as an analysis of conditional epistemic probability. That would not offer us a descriptive analysis of conditional epistemic probability. And the reason is that in order to decide the prior probability of the hypothesis, we would need to decide what is the relevant evidence we have in our disposal, and that should be decided by the question of what evidence do we ought to have or ought to take into consideration, which is clearly a normative question, right? And it's not clear whether this, what evidence do we ought to have or take into consideration can be further analyzed in terms of purely descriptive terms. Okay. So, by all appearances, this is an analysis that is also normally reliable. I mean, you can't get away from normal concepts and just offer a descriptive analysis of conditional epistemic probability. That would be an account of probability that would suit Heathwood's analysis of epistemic rationality. So, conclusion. Our contention is sound is that we cannot understand the notion of being reasonable in terms of the concept of objective intrinsic probability. That just seems hopeless. It just seems irrelevant to the notion of epistemic rationality. But when we appeal to the notion of conditional epistemic probability, that seems more promising, more hopeful. It just seems that this notion is normatively lateral. I mean, it cannot be given a straightforward, purely descriptive analysis. And we have seen two accounts of conditional epistemic probability that seem inherently normative. The Ridian account, the Pandingas, and the Bayesian account. So to conclude, we have defended the moral-epistemic parity by noting, on the one hand, that there is no asymmetry between moral-epistemic open-question arguments, depending on the kind of analysis that we are offering, proximate, less proximate, or distant. And we have seen that Heathwood's analysis seems to be less proximate, in the sense that it remains uncertain whether the analysis he offers is actually descriptive or normative. Heathwood thinks that it's a descriptive analysis because he thinks that you can offer a descriptive account of probability as it relates to epistemic rationality. But as we have seen, when we try to dig deeper and try to understand better what an account of probability would be descriptive and suit his account of epistemic rationality, it seems that it's not straightforward that that analysis would not be itself normative. Okay. So this basically concludes my talk. I want to go back to the example he gives as a case study of his account of rationality. Because I think it's a very clear example and help us get a grip on his account. So he says that suppose you have a visual experience of a table in front of you. So it's suppose that it's also a descriptive fact that there is a table in front of you. And this actually makes it likely that there is a table in front of you given the experience. And this makes it reasonable for you. So the descriptive fact makes it likely that there is a table in front of you, which makes it reasonable for you to believe. But see that he says here, suppose this in fact makes it very likely. Well, this is an assumption, right? How do we know that our visual experience makes it very likely that there is what is represented out there? I mean, here he takes it as an assumption. So it just, I know that because there is always the question of what is the evidence we ought to take into consideration. There might be cases where we have a visual experience, but nevertheless we have independent evidence that suggests that we shouldn't take very seriously our visual experience. So if you're in psychology lab and you know that they are making experiments with optical illusions and projections and so on, when you step into that psychology lab that studies optical illusions, then you cannot just lightheartedly take that it's a fact that your visual experience makes it very likely that what is represented is actually out there. And that's an important point, I think, because it underlines the question of what evidence we ought to take into consideration in order to have a reasonable belief. Mere appeal to descriptive experience cannot justify, cannot make it likely that the representative is out there and therefore have a reasonable belief vis-a-vis your perceptual experience. This does not mean that you should be a skeptic about what you see. It just means that you cannot just take it as a simple truth that what is represented is actually there. Now, if we say that, if we accept a principle about the rationality of perception like phenomenal conservatism of Michael Humer, which is actually a colleague of Heathwood in Colorado, and say, unless you have reasons to doubt your perceptual experience, then you can rely on reliable verdicts, okay? But that would not be, suppose we accept this principle about the relation of perception and rational belief, okay? Now, this principle itself would not be amenable to a descriptive analysis. It does not seem to be an empirical descriptive fact of truth. So it's not that, it would be again some sort of epistemic conceptual truth, or an epistemic fixed point, as I would like to call them, but that would not vindicate epistemic reductionism or epistemic descriptivism as Heathwood would like. Okay. So Heathwood had actually just wrote the response to our paper. It just came out, so I'm going to
Open discussion. Please ask questions or comments.
So I have maybe two questions. First one is, so you argue that the moral claims as well as epistemic claims are not reducible to descriptive or factual claims, and you seem to assume that, given this, it somehow goes without saying that there are moral and epistemic facts. Is this right? Don't we need some further premise to move?
Yeah, you're right, because someone might think that epistemic sentences cannot be analyzed in descriptive terms, but nevertheless be an anti-reality like expressionist, for example.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, in the context of this debate, because Heathwood is also a realist, you just ignore the fact that someone could be a non-descriptivist but anti-realist. Of course, that's an assumption in the context of this debate between two realists. Yeah.
Okay, and then one more question. So in both the cases, well, I find the argument quite plausible. In both the cases, it's a case of irreducible of the normative to the descriptive. So are there, according to you, some other interesting normative claims beyond the moral and epistemic ones? And if so, can the argument be generalized to all normative claims or something like that?
That's extremely interesting because I'm puzzled by this thought. I mean, I read Putnam's paper. There is at least one prior truth where he defends a weak version of the principle of non-contradiction. And tempted to the thought that the principle of non-contradiction might be another logical fixed point. But when I recently, I'm not a logician, but recently I read a book about philosophy of logic, and I realized that there are a dozen systems of logic.
Of course,
And some of them reject the principle of non-contradiction. So it will be very hard. You can try it, of course, but it won't be easy because there are party system logicians. It's very hard work to try to show that, especially in a domain that you are not so familiar with it. But it might be even the case, I mean, I have been thinking about the metaphysical fixed points. I mean, could it be that the principle of sufficient reason, like its principle of sufficient reason, is somehow a kind of metaphysical fixed point? But, I mean, people would not be, I think people would be more reluctant, even more reluctant to say that there are metaphysical fixed points. I mean, for one thing, the principle of sufficient reason has been subjected to criticism, I think. But it's a natural thought that if you could just supply the same kind of argument, extend this kind of facts, these companions and guilt arguments. These are thoughts that I'm also having, but I'm kind of skeptical whether it can be, well, you can try to do it, but it would be hard. Perhaps in the future, I don't know.
Okay.
So I appreciate that at the end of the talk we're left with the argument that moral facts and epistemic facts are on a par. They sort of stand or fall together in terms of realism. And so I guess I'm just curious about your view lying behind that argument. So do you think that's the only way that we can mark off a difference in realism about morality versus epistemology, namely in terms of whether or not you have successful reductions to some kind of a base that doesn't appeal to normative facts? Or do you think is there some other way to distinguish realism in, say, epistemic domains or to go in for realism in epistemic domains and some kind of non-realist or expressivist position in moral domains?
Part of the argument is just one argument in favor of realism. So it's not that you use it to distinguish between. It's not that you use the argument to distinguish between realism and anti-realism. It's just one argument which it works basically as a companion and guilt argument. In the sense that you say, well, we have this kind of facts, they are normative, they have this kind of normative aspects like motivation, categorical reasons, and then there is also this category of facts that also seem to be normative because they have these also normative aspects like motivation, categorical reasons, and so on. And then you say, of course there are epistemic facts. You cannot deny that you have categorical reason, I don't know, to be in the field of evolution or something like that. So there are epistemic facts. But of course, if there are epistemic facts, they resemble insofar as they are normative moral facts, you should believe in moral facts as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the thought. It's a basic companion and guilt argument.
Yeah, no. So your position then is that this has done sufficient work in establishing the parity between moral facts and epistemic facts.
Well, Terence Cuneo has.
Right.
He has a lot of work. He has done a lot of work in that book, trying to show that there seem to be two categories of normative facts, and they somehow live parallel lives.
Yeah.
But one line of criticism to his book is basically to indicate like Heathwood or Jonas Olson or Craig or John, they basically say, well, we need to distinguish between epistemic facts and moral facts. Moral facts might be reducible, while epistemic facts are reducible. This is the classic line of response to his book, not just by Heathwood, but by others as well. I mean, I another paper by Heathwood John, by Jonas Olsson. But I just think that you can't resist this kind of counter-argument.
Yeah.
Actually, to my mind, it seems interesting to explore the possibility of whether there are moral and conceptual truths and try to build another parity between the moral and epistemic. I mean, it just seems a conceptual truth that in order to have rational belief, you need some sort of justification, right? And you cannot really provide an argument for that. Because in order to provide an argument for the claim, you need to presuppose, again, that for rational belief, justification is required. So it just, you have to take it as indispensable, like a bedrock fixed point, something like that, foundational point of reasoning. And given that there are parallels between the moral and epistemic, perhaps there are also moral fixed points, like that it's actually wrong to harm others for fun, as far as that goes, because there might be rare cases, and so on.
There's a follow-up question. So the second premise of the argument, the core argument was that irreducible epistemic facts exist. And so I know that you said that this is not an issue in this discussion, but still I would like to know what's supposed to be good arguments for this premise. For instance, is the part of this one argument in support of the second premise something like an open question argument?
Yeah.
It seems to me that the open question argument can by itself discriminate between realist or actualist or relativist or so. So suppose I'm a relativist about epistemic facts, which I tend to be anyway. So it seems to me that I can accept a lot of open questions about.
You're right.
But I still can be.
Yes, that goes back to the first point. I mean, you're right, because open question arguments can be used. They just say that the concept or property is irreducible. Okay, if you have other arguments like ontological covariance arguments from Mackey, or whatever arguments against the plausibility of postulating the relevant ontology, the open question argument like linear can be used to support expressivism, for example.
So there are probably other arguments.
Yeah, it's not the only argument, but in the context that you accept that you should be a realist, the open question argument just shows that if you're a realist, you should be an anti-reductionist. But in the wider context of normativity debate, it just shows that a certain concept seems indefinable. It doesn't show that the property actually exists. That's the point. And in order to be a realist, you need other arguments as well. And so I suppose that someone who is a realist needs to appeal to other arguments that he would claim that actively explain the phenomena that calls for explanation. So if I were in the position to write a book, I would start with some data or constraints that we need to explain. Then I would try to argue that the best explanation, the adaptive explanation, requires that we postulate the relevant ontology or facts. But that would be very, very contentious anyway, because then some people will appeal to appraisal and will say, well, we don't need the facts. We don't need to inflate our ontology, we need to explain the constraints we put forth, and so on. So one constraint, for example, is to explain epistemic progress or moral progress. Why do we think that we have a better world in terms of understanding or knowledge? We have a better understanding in terms of relativity theory in contrast to Newtonian mechanics, for example, or Darwinian theory of evolution in terms of Aristotelian biology, and so on. And the thought is that there are facts, epistemic facts, and we get closer to these facts, we have more knowledge, and that explains the progress. I don't say that this is the best explanation, there might be anti-realist explanations. And you have to explain disagreement, progress, actually talk in everyday life, as if there are facts about what to believe and what to do.
So then I have a minor question. You introduced this widely unconditional epistemic probability, and the notion of defeater, the notion of proper functioning, we just connected to the notion of warrant, and the objection was that this is not really a non-normative notion because proper function is explained by planting in terms of some port, what evidence we ought to have or something. Well, maybe planting explains that in this way, but I can still imagine some Milliganians some followers of Ruth Milligan who in fact introduced the notion of philosophy of mind and so on. And here they also talk about some oldness, but this is a kind of the normative oldness in the robust sense. So stable. I can imagine that somebody would like to reinterpret the Zuraidian notion in some kind of exactly statistical manner. So how would you respond to this possibility?
Actually, that's a good point, because there are understandings of function that really come from the theory of evolutionary biology. So one way to try to do that in purely descriptive terms is to try to understand function. Probably function common faculties are faculties that function probably in terms of the notional function of biology or evolutionary biology. I think one more with that actually relates to Candida's argument, evolutionary argument is naturalism, is that our faculties do not function properly in regard to how they evolve to function. I mean, in the way they evolve to function, they offer malfunction, because actually evolution does not aim at truth, but aims at survival and reproduction. So often our faculties just malfunction, and that has purely evolutionary explanation. And the worry then would be that you can't have a theory of epistemic rational belief if you apply this kind of understanding of function.
Probably the naturalist, like staunch naturalist, should go in this direction. So they should find out. So because if they usually rely on the notion of reliability, of course we can discuss if the notion of reliability is non-normative or normative.
Yeah.
But they tend to define it non-normative terms.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of movement. So then they could appeal to some kind of notion, which makes room actually for some malfunction. But just like because the terminology in the principle reminds me of this naturalistic interpretation.
I think you're
or the proper function, including the ought. But
you're totally right that if we understand the notion of function in Kantian evolutionary way, the analysis provided would be, it seems descriptive, right? If that can be done, then you would have an analysis of conditional epistemic probability that would be descriptive. It's just that my worry is that if you apply a descriptive analysis of the notion of function in terms of our evolutionary origins and the way our cognitive faculties evolved, then you won't have a plausible theory of epistemic rationality. And my worry is that our faculties evolved, and often our faculties that evolve, they do not function very reliably.
So, but there is this qualification in normal conditions, which is basically a naturalistic correlate of all the features. Because your argument also relies on that the defeater, the notion of defeater is a normative one. Also, maybe in the traditional epistemology it is, but there is a correlate to that in the American area, which is the normal conditions, which is also normative. So.
Okay, I will grant you that this is something that can be tried. I'm not very hopeful, but it can be tried.
Well, I was just going to jump in and try to say something I thought I heard you issue a reservation about a moment ago Because one worry with the teleofunctional account that explains these things in terms of evolutionary success is that it might be the case that in some situations, some thing we're interested in explaining the normativity of was selected for in ways that we think are irrational. So I was trying to come up with an example. I don't know if this works well, but in terms of conditional epistemic probability, it's possible that for the most part, if there's a module that tracks these kinds of things, is reliable about actually getting the probabilities right, but that there's a switch that kicks in if you have, say, greater chance to mate. So the module works something like track the probabilities as they actually are, and furthermore avoid risky behavior, unless there's a chance to mate, in which case treat the probability as having a greater chance of success, because there's going to be an evolutionary trade-off about the success of people who do things like that in situations that allow them to mate. In which case, it looks like the teleofunctionalist is going to have to say, by that account, that's the proper function of that thing. But we don't want to say that it's working properly in terms of capturing probability. Was that the idea?
Yeah, it's in general spirit of the idea. But I think that Lightslab's idea is very interesting, because people can do naturalistic analysis of function, and there are certain analyses like militants. Then the account could be, in principle, a naturalistic account. And that works. If that works, then we could have a naturalistic analysis of conditional distinct probability in terms of the notion of forward function, where the notion of function is understood in the telefunctional way we are talking about. But of course, there are this kind of words that we are underlining.
Yeah.
Do we still have any comments, questions? So we can also,
Just on my disagreement with, I think I can speak for myself. My basic disagreement with Heathwood is not that he provides a mistaken analysis of epistemic rationality. I'm actually sympathetic to the analysis. It's just that I part ways with him when he says that probability and evidence can be understood in purely descriptive terms, because I don't think that probability for us, at least it's not so obvious for the discussion so far, that it can be just given descriptive analysis. I mean, that's the basic point of disagreement is that. So I will be able to even grant that the epistemic rationality is likely belief given evidence, but I will resist the analysis of likely belief given evidence in descriptive terms. So I would think
that's your own interpretation, or it's some kind of standard interpretation that divides in framework. In the very notion of prior probabilities somehow presupposes what you called relevant evidence. Once you add those adjectives like relevant, so you almost get normativity. That I'm not sure if Bayesian interpret themselves in those terms that.
You mean the mathematician based?
Well, also philosophers who are now writing about Bayesian framework. Probabilities. Do they think that in the very notion of prior probability, which is supposed to be independent of the evidence, the evidence is something like normative notion, or I'm not sure, but I'm asking. Maybe you can argue that it should be, but I'm not sure if they understand that.
Well, typically, I don't know, mathematicians when they do statistics, they are not very sensitive to these kind of questions, I think. They are not philosophers. I mean, they don't ponder on the question whether evidence or prior probabilities should be understood as probabilities that relate to evidence.
It seems to me that for them is whatever led you to form the belief, whatever kind of experience or evidence, but they do not worry about some kind of relevant or evidence. But your argument sort of hinged on the idea that they, in a way, need to incorporate into this.
Well, if you are philosophically sensitive, we should, I think, raise these questions. I mean, if you have philosophical sensitivities about probability, I mean, you might be a great mathematician and probability calculus and all that, but you might not have very philosophical questions about probability. And that happens in...
Okay, so maybe your argument, and I'll get it, maybe your argument is that if this notion is to serve as a good definition of epistemic like property, like reasonable belief, we should basically care about what's the prime probability based on, and if we start to care about what's the prime probability based on, we eventually get some kind of normative standard. Like,
Well, yeah.
No, I think this is correct because it often goes almost without saying that probability is a descriptive notion, but the arguments are considerable that this is not so clear. And I think that's interesting.
Okay, so then I have no problems now.
I think the basic point is that when you try to find an account of probability, that would be an account that would suit Heathwood's analysis of rational in terms of probability. And it's not clear that you can offer an analysis of probability that is purely descriptive. That's the point. I mean,
Okay. So, I think that we can conclude right now. Thank you again.